Hello, everyone. My name is Marcus. I'm 38, and I live in a cramped, sun-dappled apartment on the south side of Chicago with my 12-year-old son, Jamal. I'm a security supervisor by day, a night owl by habit, and a single father by circumstance, though the word circumstance feels too polite for the hurricane that being alone with a child can bring. That evening, the kind where the wind whispers secrets through the cracks of the old window frame, began like any other. Homework scattered across the kitchen table, a half-finished cup of coffee slowly going cold, and Jamal's sneakers thumping against the floor as he practiced his new piano piece. I remember thinking how small the apartment felt, as if the walls were leaning in, listening to the pulse of our ordinary life. And in that ordinary life, I found a moment of pride watching him play, his fingers dancing on the keys with a grace I hoped the world would one day recognize. But that pride turned brittle the moment I received the email. The local music academy had rejected Jamal's application for their advanced program. At first, I read it too quickly, thinking it was a clerical error, a misplaced judgment. But as the words sank in, a chill ran down my spine. The academy cited insufficient potential compared to other candidates. Insufficient potential. Jamal, who could replicate a Chopin nocturne by ear after only one listen, was considered insufficient. The absurdity hit me in waves. I stared at his small, hopeful face, tracing the curve of his jaw, and felt a surge of anger so raw it almost knocked the air out of my lungs. How could someone dismiss him, dismiss us, like we were invisible shadows passing through a doorway that they alone had the key to? I poured the coffee into the sink and sank into the chair across from him, trying to collect my thoughts. The injustice wasn't just about music. It was about recognition, opportunity, and the slow, grinding reality of being a black single dad in a society that often measures talent through the narrow lens of privilege. Every denied application, every smirk of condescension, every whispered not ready yet, was a reminder of a system designed to exclude us. And I knew, in that heavy, unshakable way that parents do, that I would not, allow this to be the final note in Jamal's story. That night, as the wind rattled the window frames and Jamal's small piano notes lingered in the air, I made a silent vow. We would not let their judgment define him. I would fight every step, every word, every ounce of energy I possessed until they recognized what I had always known. Jamal's potential could not be contained. The apartment, dimly lit, seemed to lean closer as if eager to hear my plans unfold. I imagined the long nights ahead, our strategy taking shape in whispered conversations and scribbled notes. There was fear, of course, but there was also a strange exhilaration, the thrill of standing up to forces that felt untouchable, the anticipation of bending a system that had been us too long. And so, from that ordinary kitchen on a quiet Chicago evening, our story began, a story of defiance, resilience, and the kind of love that refuses to bow. The next morning, Jamal walked to school with a weight in his chest that mirrored my own. I tried to mask my anger with a calm demeanor, offering him a pat on the shoulder and a soft, "It's going to be okay, son," but I knew that was half-truth at best. His small eyes, usually bright with curiosity, carried the shadow of disappointment. It was the first time I saw him grapple with the sting of rejection on a scale that mattered to him. Music wasn't just a hobby, it was his sanctuary, the world where he could escape the narrow corridors of judgment that too often defined our existence. And now that sanctuary had been questioned by people who had never seen him struggle, never seen the hours he spent practicing while the neighborhood buzzed with chaos outside our window. By mid-morning, I had already drafted an email to the academy, fingers flying across the keyboard, fueled by equal parts frustration and determination. I didn't want to yell, didn't want to make threats. I wanted evidence. I wanted their reasoning dissected and exposed for the shallow. Biased nonsense it was. In my mind, I pictured the academy's pristine hallways, white walls lined with framed accolades, and administrators in tailored suits, sitting in air-conditioned offices as they judged children by metrics that had nothing to do with talent. How convenient for them to dismiss a black boy from the South Side, whose home might not match their polished expectations, whose father's job didn't scream influence or wealth. I didn't need sympathy. I needed justice. Walking Jamal home that afternoon, I couldn't shake the memory of the receptionist's smile when I had called the academy, a smile that said, without words, "You don't belong here." It wasn't outright hostility, just the quiet, insidious certainty that we were inferior. Every step we took through our neighborhood seemed to echo that same message, subtle and cruel. I felt a burning urge to transform that anger into something tangible, something that would force them to reckon with the talent they refused to see. And so I began collecting what I could: Jamal's recordings, his recital awards, letters from teachers who had witnessed his skill firsthand. Each document was a stone in the foundation. I was building one that would eventually support a structure too strong for them to ignore. By the time we reached our apartment, I'd already sketched out a plan in my head. This wasn't just about music lessons anymore. It was about proving that our lives mattered, that Jamal's potential couldn't be measured by a narrow, prejudiced standard. That night, as he practiced again, I sat silently in the corner, absorbing every note, letting the music fuel the fire within me. This denial wasn't the end. It was the spark that would ignite a change not only for us, but for anyone who had ever been underestimated because of the color of their skin or the circumstances of their birth. And I promised myself then, in that quiet living room illuminated by the soft glow of a desk, lamp, and the resilient notes of a child's piano, that we would not falter. Whatever it took, however long it took, Jamal would get the chance he deserved, and they would remember that a black single. Dad refused to give up, even when the world tried to tell him he should. Over the following week, I realized that the Academy's rejection was only a symptom of a much larger problem. It wasn't just a single email or a dismissive letter. It was the echo of years of systemic obstacles that black children face, quietly coded into every institution we encounter. I began to notice it everywhere, in the hiring notices plastered outside local businesses, in the casual comments tossed around staff rooms, in the way neighborhood kids were steered away from certain programs while others were celebrated. That first taste of injustice at the academy had awakened a kind of vigilance in me. I could no longer look at rejection as isolated events. Each was a thread in a tapestry of bias that I intended to unravel. I started documenting everything meticulously. Each interaction Jamal had with teachers, mentors, even the receptionist who had smiled through her disappointment, was recorded, not in a sinister sense, but as proof, a trail of breadcrumbs that could one day show how our potential was constantly undervalued. I learned to read between the lines. A parent meeting that ended too quickly, a teacher who avoided eye contact when discussing Jamal's abilities, an admission form phrased in ways that discouraged honest answers. I noted the names, the dates, the inconsistencies, and slowly, the outline of the problem became clear. What began as personal anger transformed into a structured plan, because anger alone could burn bright, but only strategy could build something lasting from the ashes. Late one evening, I shared my discoveries with Jamal. He listened, eyes wide, but not fearful. Instead, I saw a spark of understanding, a recognition that the world could be unfair, but unfairness was not invincible. "Dad," he said, "we can fight this." His words, simple and unpolished, carried the weight of hope. It wasn't naive optimism. It was a declaration of partnership, a silent pact between father and son that we would face the obstacles together. I realized then that my fight was no longer just about music lessons. It was about teaching Jamal that injustice could be challenged, that denial could be confronted, and that sometimes the very systems designed to suppress could be redirected, exposed, and transformed by persistence. I remember sitting at our kitchen table, Jamal's school folder open, his piano sheet music stacked beside it, and feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The work ahead was immense, but for the first time, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't just reacting, I was preparing. Each rejection letter, each subtle dismissal was a call to action, and I made a silent vow, repeating it to myself like a mantra. No system, no policy, no indifferent administrator would rob my son of the recognition he deserved. Not while I had breath in my lungs and fire in my heart. By the time the week ended, I had outlined the first moves of our plan, knowing that the next steps would require more than documents and emails. They would demand courage, cleverness, and the kind of unyielding determination only desperation combined with love can forge. And as I watched Jamal practice once more, fingers gliding over the keys with effortless grace, I understood the truth that would guide me through the storm. Injustice might slow us down, but it would never stop us. That night, the apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls pressing in as if they, too, were aware of the storm brewing just outside our door. I pulled out a worn notebook, its edges frayed from years of use, and began scribbling plans, diagrams, and ideas. Coffee sat beside me, forgotten and cooling, while Jamal practiced in the background, his melodies echoing through the thin walls. The contrast between his effortless creation and the meticulous, painstaking strategizing I was forced to undertake struck me sharply. He had talent by instinct, and I had to provide the structure that instinct alone could not navigate. I started by breaking down the problem into small, actionable steps. First, I needed allies, people who understood the system, who had influence without arrogance, who would be willing to lend their voices to our cause. Then, I needed irrefutable evidence. Letters, recordings, teacher testimonials, even casual conversations that exposed the subtle biases hiding in plain sight. Finally, I had to consider timing. One misstep, one premature confrontation, and everything could collapse before it began. Every night, I imagined myself walking into that academy, holding my proof like a shield, every word rehearsed, every argument sharpened to a fine edge. During one particularly quiet moment, an idea struck me. Why not reach beyond the obvious allies, beyond the local circles that often overlooked? People like us? There were former students, community activists, even local musicians who had once been dismissed themselves. If we could gather their experiences and insights, our story would no longer be solitary. It would resonate as part of a larger pattern, a chorus of voices demanding recognition. I began compiling a list, noting names and potential contacts, imagining conversations that had yet to happen. Each name was a seed of possibility, a tiny light in the darkness that threatened to overwhelm us. Jamal, noticing my intensity, paused his practice and tilted his head toward me. Dad, are we really going to do this? His voice carried a mix of awe and curiosity, and I realized in that moment how much he depended on me, not just to protect him, but to lead him through the labyrinth of a world that wasn't always fair. I took a deep breath, letting the sound of the piano fill the space between us, and nodded. Yes, son, we're going to do this together, step by step, note by note, until they have no choice but to see what you can do. His smile was small but resolute, and it struck me as profoundly brave. The kitchen became our headquarters. Post-it notes adorned the fridge with reminders, our table a battlefield of documents and recordings, every corner alive with a quiet hum of strategy. I felt a strange exhilaration, a mix of fear and purpose. Every night, as Jamal practiced and I plotted, the world outside seemed to retreat, leaving just the two of us, two souls bound by love and defiance, preparing for a confrontation that would test not only our resolve, but our faith in justice itself. And as the hours ticked by, the plan began to take shape, intricate and precise, like the complex melodies Jamal played, a composition of determination, intelligence, and raw, unyielding courage. It was a rainy Thursday evening when she appeared, unexpected, unassuming, and yet somehow significant. I was hunched over the kitchen table, cross-referencing Jamal's recital recordings with letters from teachers when there was a knock at the door. Standing there was Ms. Patel, a former neighbor I barely knew but who had quietly observed Jamal's musical progress over the years. She was a community liaison at a nonprofit organization advocating for educational equity. Her presence felt almost cinematic, like a plot device stepping in, just when the tension was at its peak. But unlike fiction, this moment was real, and the stakes could not be higher. She stepped inside, shaking off her umbrella and offering a tentative smile. "Marcus, I've been following your posts and the situation with Jamal," she said. Her voice was calm, deliberate, and surprisingly soothing. "I think I can help." I didn't immediately respond, unsure if I was witnessing generosity or testing another door that might close in our faces. But as she laid out her knowledge of the Academy's internal politics, the subtle ways talent was judged, and the resources she could provide, legal advice, connections to local press, and advocacy contacts, I felt a surge of relief so strong it nearly knocked me off my chair. For the first time, I saw a bridge between our isolation and the support we needed. Ms. Patel's advice was precise. She suggested a systematic approach: compile all documentation, request meetings with administrators, and frame the narrative not as anger, but as undeniable evidence of overlooked talent. She warned of resistance, of subtle gaslighting and dismissal, but also assured me that persistence could flip the balance. Listening to her, I felt the first hints of strategy coalescing into something tangible. It was no longer a solo fight. There was guidance, mentorship, and a perspective that illuminated paths I hadn't considered. We planned to meet the Academy within 2 weeks, a timeline that felt both ambitious and necessary to maintain momentum. What struck me most was how Ms. Patel understood the emotional stakes without diminishing them. She recognized Jamal's disappointment, my frustration, and the subtle weight of being a Black single father navigating systems designed to underestimate us. Her presence transformed what had been late-night musings into actionable steps. I scribbled notes furiously, feeling a mixture of determination and gratitude. This alliance, unexpected and improbable, was a reminder that even in the loneliest battles, support can appear in the unlikeliest forms. That night, after she left, I sat with Jamal listening to his piano practice echo through the apartment. "We have someone on our side now," I whispered. He didn't need more explanation. He understood. In the quiet hum of the apartment, I felt a subtle shift. The plan was no longer just about my anger or his lost opportunity. It was about creating a force strong enough to challenge the systemic indifference that had denied him. With Ms. Patel's guidance, our fight became not only possible but also smarter, sharper, and imbued with a quiet, unwavering hope that for the first time in days felt real. The following days were consumed by meticulous evidence gathering. Every email from the Academy, every comment from a teacher, every small slight that Jamal had encountered over the years was documented. I learned to pay attention to subtleties, the way a teacher would hesitate before praising Jamal, the tone in which his achievements were described, the patterns and selection criteria that favored certain backgrounds over others. Each piece of evidence was a puzzle piece, revealing the underlying bias that had prevented my son from receiving the opportunities he deserved. I cataloged everything in binders, folders, and digital files, labeling and cross-referencing so nothing could be overlooked. The process was tedious, exhausting, but empowering. I felt a sense of control I hadn't experienced since receiving that first rejection letter. I also began recording Jamal's performances, capturing not just the technical proficiency, but the emotion, the subtle nuances that made his music exceptional. I remembered a recital last year where he had played a complex piece flawlessly, and the judges barely glanced up from their score sheets. That moment had stayed with me, a reminder of how easy it was for brilliance to be ignored. Now, those performances would serve as irrefutable proof of his talent. I organized video clips by piece, noting the date, location, and audience reaction. Every recording became a testament, not only to Jamal's skill, but also to the resilience we had cultivated together. But documentation alone wouldn't suffice. I needed context, insight, and corroboration. I reached out to his previous instructors, mentors, and even friends of the family who had witnessed Jamal's dedication firsthand. Each person I contacted was willing to provide statements, letters, or interviews, which I added to our growing dossier. In doing so, I began to see a larger pattern emerge, not just in Jamal's experience, but in the experiences of countless children of color navigating educational and artistic institutions. It was a subtle but persistent current of systemic exclusion, one that required careful navigation and undeniable evidence to confront. Late into the night, I worked alongside Jamal, not on piano this time, but on assembling the materials, rehearsing what we would present, and anticipating the questions or dismissive comments we might encounter. I wanted him to understand the power of preparation, the importance of structure and clarity when facing authority. It was teaching beyond the notes of a melody, lessons in courage, resilience, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. And while he sometimes frowned at the tedium, I could see a sense of purpose taking root in him, a determination to reclaim what had been unfairly denied. As the binders grew thicker and the folder on my laptop became a digital fortress, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Each document, recording, and testimonial was a brick in the wall we were building. Not a wall of separation, but a rampart of accountability that would force the Academy to face the truth. I knew this phase would be long and arduous, but every detail we compiled, every piece of evidence we meticulously documented, brought us one step closer to confronting injustice with clarity and force. And in the quiet of our apartment, as Jamal's piano notes drifted upward, I felt an unspoken promise. Solidifying, we were ready for the confrontation, ready to challenge the system, and determined to win, not for vengeance alone, but for recognition, dignity, and the future my son deserved. The day of the confrontation arrived, and I could feel the tension in my chest like a coiled spring ready to snap. I walked into the academy with Jamal by my side, our binders under my arm, and a sense of purpose guiding every step. The air inside was cool, almost sterile, and the polished floors reflected our shoes as if silently reminding me of how out of place we might appear to them. But I refused to shrink, refused to let their environment intimidate us. Every glance, every whisper, every smirk we might encounter would meet our preparedness head-on. I had rehearsed every word, anticipated every objection, and memorized every piece of evidence that told our story. We were met by the head administrator, a woman whose expression was polite but guarded, like a predator, assessing prey without giving herself away. She invited us into her office, and I felt the weight of countless unspoken judgments pressing down. "Marcus, Jamal," she began, her tone measured. "I understand you wanted to discuss the audition results." I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "Yes, I want to discuss not just the results, but the process and the patterns of decision-making that denied my son the opportunity he rightfully earned." The words felt heavy but necessary, each syllable carefully chosen to convey authority without aggression. I laid out the binders, the recordings, the letters from teachers, and the documented instances of bias I had meticulously compiled. Her eyes flickered over the evidence, a subtle shift in posture betraying the first crack in her armor. She attempted to dismiss one of the letters, calling it anecdotal, but I countered with additional documentation, highlighting patterns and inconsistencies that made dismissal impossible. Jamal, watching from the side, was quiet but alert, absorbing the dynamics of authority and resistance, understanding for the first time that sometimes recognition required more than talent. It required persistence, articulation, and unwavering confidence. The conversation stretched for hours, administrators alternating between polite defensiveness and veiled condescension. But with each presentation of evidence, each calm, factual rebuttal to their subtle deflections, the room's energy shifted. They realized they were no longer simply delivering a verdict to a grateful student and parent. They were confronted with accountability. I noticed a slight tension in the receptionist's posture when she peeked in, the shift in tone from measured control to unease. Even in these small, seemingly trivial cues, I recognized the effectiveness of preparation, documentation, and composure. By the time we left the academy, the first stage of our confrontation had been laid bare. There was no immediate apology, no sweeping declaration of justice, but the message was clear: we were no longer invisible. They had seen, and we had made them see, the undeniable proof of talent and the refusal of a black single father to let bias define his son's opportunities. As we stepped back into the evening air, the city buzzing around us, I felt the first taste of triumph, not in celebration, but in the quiet knowledge that the fight had begun and that we were equipped to continue. The confrontation wasn't over, but the battlefield had been clearly marked, and we were ready to press forward. The backlash was immediate, though not in the way I had fully anticipated. Social media, often a tool for awareness, became a double-edged sword. Parents at the academy whispered behind our backs, painting Jamal's ambition as audacity, my persistence as overreach. There were messages on neighborhood forums questioning our motives, subtle digs at my single-parent status, and even a few thinly veiled racial jabs that made my chest tighten with a familiar ache. I had anticipated resistance from the academy, but the community's murmurs felt sharper, more invasive, like tiny cuts accumulating on my resolve. Each comment, each critique was a test of endurance, both mine and Jamal's, but I refused to falter. Jamal, to his credit, met the barrage with remarkable composure. He didn't sulk or retreat. Instead, he asked questions, sought understanding, and continued to practice with the same dedication he always had. Watching him, I realized that the backlash wasn't just against us. It was against the very idea that a black child could demand recognition without apology. The subtle, almost invisible undercurrent of prejudice that had shaped our lives for years now manifested in tangible ways. And I had to shield him not just emotionally, but strategically. We began carefully curating our communications, responding only when necessary, framing each interaction with clarity, calm, and undeniable evidence. The local news soon caught wind of our story. A journalist, intrigued by the combination of talent and adversity, requested an interview. I hesitated initially, wary of misrepresentation, but saw the potential for amplifying our message. The story, when published, highlighted Jamal's abilities, our meticulous documentation, and the systemic patterns of exclusion that many families of color face. Suddenly, our private struggle had transformed into a public narrative. The backlash persisted. Of course, letters to editors, snide remarks on comment sections, but it now existed alongside a growing wave of support. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers began reaching out, offering encouragement, sharing similar experiences, and validating our efforts. Amid this rising storm of criticism and support, I learned to navigate the delicate balance between visibility and vulnerability. Each public interaction, each carefully worded statement, was a rehearsal in poise and persistence. I discovered that the backlash, while painful, also revealed the very biases we were challenging. It exposed the discomfort of a community unaccustomed to seeing people of color demand recognition, unaccustomed to accountability, and unaccustomed to being confronted with their own prejudices. Rather than retreating, I leaned into it, using the scrutiny to refine our approach and strengthen our resolve. By the end of the week, the backlash had become both shield and sword. It forced us to be precise, articulate, and unwavering, and it allowed allies to surface in unexpected places. Parents, educators, and community members who had initially remained silent now spoke up, offering insights and assistance. The tension in the air was palpable, but it carried with it a strange energy, a momentum that hinted at something larger than our immediate struggle. We had crossed the threshold from private fight to public cause, and while the backlash tested us, it also fortified our determination, teaching both Jamal and me that resilience was not merely enduring adversity, it was transforming it into leverage, strategy, and ultimately opportunity. As the story began circulating more widely, local media outlets picked it up, each retelling adding layers of visibility we hadn't anticipated. Reporters came to our apartment, asking to see Jamal's practice, to speak with me about our fight, to understand what had led a black single dad to challenge the norms of a prestigious music academy. Initially, I felt exposed, vulnerable under the gaze of cameras and microphones. But I reminded myself that this visibility was a tool. Each interview, each article, was an opportunity to turn our private struggle into a public reckoning, to shed light on the systemic injustices so often hidden behind polite smiles and mission statements. The community's response was electrifying. Parents, educators, and even former students began contacting us, sharing their own stories of subtle discrimination, overlooked talent, and denied opportunities. These weren't isolated incidents. They formed a pattern, a tapestry of experiences that underscored the very issues Jamal had faced. I felt a swell of pride watching Jamal absorb this, realizing that our fight was no longer just about him. It had grown into a movement, a chorus of voices demanding acknowledgement. We were becoming a symbol, not by choice, but by necessity. And as the local network aired a feature on our struggle, I watched the reactions pour in. Emails, messages, and even calls from neighbors we hadn't seen in years, all rallying in support. This newfound attention brought both hope and pressure. School administrators, once distant and dismissive, began to shift their stance, their public statements carefully, crafted to appear measured while masking unease. I could sense the subtle tremor beneath their polished exteriors. Their authority, previously unchallenged, was now confronted by a growing wave of accountability. At every press mention, every social media post, our case gained legitimacy, forcing the academy to consider that ignoring us might no longer be an option. I began planning how to leverage this momentum, coordinating with Ms. Patel and our newly formed network of allies to ensure that visibility translated into meaningful action. Jamal, meanwhile, thrived under this attention in unexpected ways. His confidence, previously tempered by rejection, flourished as he realized that his talent could not be hidden or dismissed. Performances that once went unnoticed were now celebrated, and I watched him embrace this recognition with a quiet grace. Yet, I also reminded him of the responsibility that visibility carried, the need to remain focused to channel attention constructively, and to never let the noise distract from the ultimate goal: opportunity, justice, and acknowledgement of his abilities. By the end of that week, the energy surrounding us had shifted. What began as a quiet, personal struggle had grown into a collective cause, and I felt the weight of possibility pressing down. Not a burden, but a challenge I was eager to meet. Our fight for Jamal's rightful place had transcended rejection letters, social media whispers, and biased administrators. It had become a rallying point for accountability, a demonstration that persistent, strategic action could illuminate even the darkest corners of systemic prejudice. And as I watched Jamal practice that evening, the city lights reflecting off the rain-soaked streets outside, I knew we were on the cusp of something transformative, both for him and for the community we were slowly awakening. The community's rallying was unlike anything I had anticipated. Parents I had exchanged casual greetings with suddenly approached me in grocery stores, coffee shops, and even at the park, offering advice, encouragement, and stories of their own children who had faced similar struggles. Local musicians and former students volunteered to mentor Jamal, to provide supplemental training, and to vouch for his abilities in formal settings. It was as if our fight had become a mirror reflecting the unspoken frustrations and untapped potential of so many in our neighborhood. What had begun as a battle against an academy's indifference was blossoming into a movement, a subtle but powerful awakening of collective action. We organized meetings in community centers, small rooms filled with folding chairs and the hum of conversation. People shared their experiences openly, parents speaking of biased assessments, teachers recounting moments where talented children were overlooked, and local advocates outlining systemic barriers. I felt a profound sense of unity, as though the very act of speaking our truths was a form of resistance. Jamal, standing beside me in these rooms, absorbed the energy like a sponge. He witnessed firsthand that advocacy was not abstract. It was people coming together, lending their voices to amplify justice, each individual contributing to a crescendo that no single entity could ignore. The local press picked up on these community gatherings, framing them as a grassroots initiative to challenge institutional bias. Each article highlighted the growing solidarity and the mounting pressure on the academy to address not only Jamal's situation, but the broader patterns of exclusion affecting children of color. I realized that the community's support had become a lever, a force capable of turning our individual struggle into systemic scrutiny. With each meeting, each public statement, each story shared, the narrative shifted. We were no longer isolated, no longer merely a father and son fighting against unseen barriers. We were a visible, organized front demanding recognition, fairness, and accountability. Amid the swelling support, there were challenges. Not everyone welcomed the attention. Some parents resisted, fearing disruption or unwanted confrontation. Some educators remained skeptical, their biases cloaked behind polite concern. I had to navigate these tensions carefully, balancing momentum with diplomacy, ensuring that our message remained clear and unassailable. Yet, even these obstacles revealed the depth of the challenge we were addressing, the discomfort of a community forced to confront inequity and privilege. By the time we organized a public recital to showcase Jamal's talent, the community's energy was palpable. The hall was packed with neighbors, friends, mentors, and advocates, all gathered to witness not just a performance, but a statement, a declaration that talent cannot be ignored, that persistence matters, and that a Black child, supported by his father and community, could demand and command recognition. I watched Jamal take the stage, nerves mingling with excitement, and in that moment, I understood that our fight was no longer theoretical. It was alive, resonant, and undeniable, echoing far beyond the walls of the auditorium into every corner of the city that had been willing to listen. The twist came in a moment so unexpected it felt almost cinematic. During Jamal's recital, a renowned music critic who had been invited to cover the event for a local paper leaned forward in his seat, eyes widening as Jamal's fingers danced across the keys. It wasn't just technical skill. It was emotion, nuance, and a command of the music that seemed beyond his years. The audience was captivated, but the critic, someone whose words could shape reputations and open doors, recognized the brilliance that the Academy had failed to see. I watched from the side, a lump forming in my throat as the critic scribbled, notes furiously, occasionally nodding in awe. After the performance, the critic approached us, offering a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "I've reviewed countless young musicians," he said, voice tinged with sincerity, "but Jamal's interpretation is extraordinary. The Academy's oversight, it's glaring." His words were a vindication not only of Jamal's talent, but of every hour we had invested in documenting, advocating, and resisting the dismissal we had faced. The recognition wasn't just public, it was authoritative. Someone with credibility had acknowledged what I had always known. Jamal was exceptional, and the Academy had erred. This revelation shifted the momentum in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Administrators who had previously remained aloof or dismissive were now confronted with undeniable proof of both talent and oversight. The narrative could no longer be spun as subjective opinion or a simple administrative choice. The evidence of Jamal's brilliance was now publicly validated, amplified by the critics' credibility and the community's growing support. I felt a surge of relief mixed with triumph, knowing that our persistence had forced recognition, in a way mere confrontation could never have achieved alone. The twist also had an emotional impact on Jamal. He realized that his talent, once questioned and marginalized, could command attention and admiration on a wider stage. I watched him process this, the spark in his eyes reflecting pride, validation, and a newfound understanding that obstacles could be surmounted. It was more than a personal victory. It was a turning point, a moment that illuminated the power of persistence, documentation, and strategic visibility. By the time we left the recital hall, the air seemed charged with possibility. Conversations buzzed around us. Neighbors, mentors, and even attendees who had previously overlooked Jamal now spoke of his promise. This moment, unexpected and transformative, reminded me that the path to justice often bends in unforeseen ways. The Academy's error had been exposed, but more importantly, Jamal's potential had been illuminated in a way that could not be ignored. It was the twist that shifted our story from struggle to triumph, from frustration to undeniable opportunity. The Academy's response came faster than I anticipated, though not with humility. Administrators, confronted by the mounting public attention and the critics' glowing review, scrambled to maintain an air of authority. Emails and formal letters arrived, carefully worded, attempting to acknowledge Jamal's talent while simultaneously defending their original decision. It was a delicate dance of appeasement and preservation, an effort to save face while facing undeniable proof that they had erred. I read each communication carefully, parsing every phrase, noting where their tone wavered between politeness and defensiveness. It was clear the arrogance that had once shielded them was cracking. In meetings with the administrators, I maintained my composure, presenting our evidence systematically. I reminded them of the community support, the documented bias, and the critical recognition that Jamal had received. Their attempts to deflect, to minimize, or to frame our persistence as aggression were met with calm, unwavering rebuttals. I could see the subtle shifts in posture, the micro-expressions that betrayed unease. It was satisfying in a quiet, controlled way to observe the unraveling of their facade. The Academy could no longer rely on assumptions, discretion, or indifference. They were forced to confront the consequences of their oversight in a tangible, public way. As we pressed forward, I also noticed changes in the staff and teachers. Some approached cautiously, offering tentative apologies or expressing support for Jamal's talent. Others remained distant, unwilling to acknowledge responsibility. These reactions revealed a truth I had anticipated. The challenge wasn't only with administrators. It was systemic, woven into attitudes and expectations. But even so, the balance of power had shifted. Where once we had been dismissed as overzealous or improbable, we now commanded attention, and our case was impossible to ignore. Jamal, witnessing this process, learned a lesson I had hoped to impart, that accountability can be demanded, that justice isn't always immediate, but can be compelled through persistence, strategy, and undeniable evidence. I saw in his eyes a growing confidence, the realization that the world could be engaged, challenged, and reshaped by those willing to insist on fairness. The Academy's reckoning, once a distant hope, was now unfolding before us, exposing arrogance, bias, and the limitations of authority when confronted by determination and truth. By the end of this stage, it was clear the Academy could no longer control the narrative. Their power had been disrupted, their oversight publicly scrutinized, and their decisions challenged by an unwavering father, a brilliant son, and a community unwilling to remain silent. For the first time, I felt the true weight of progress, a moment where justice was not merely hoped for but actively realized. We were no longer asking for recognition, we were demanding it, and the world was finally listening. The culmination of our struggle arrived in a quiet, almost poetic moment. The Academy, cornered by evidence, community pressure, and public scrutiny, had little choice but to concede. They offered Jamal a place in their advanced program, along with a public acknowledgement of his talent. But the sweet taste of revenge wasn't in the offer itself. It was in the way the tables had turned. Administrators who had once exuded indifference now found themselves scrambling to apologize, to repair their reputation, and to accommodate a child they had underestimated. It was a reversal that carried both satisfaction and a sense of justice, not vindictive, but morally resonant. I remember walking Jamal into the academy on his first day, holding the binder that had once been our weapon. The hallways, once intimidating and imposing, now felt charged with possibility. Teachers greeted him with a mixture of recognition and caution, aware that the boy who had been denied was now entering on terms that reflected his true merit. I watched his small hands navigate the corridors, his head held high, and felt a surge of pride. This was more than acceptance. It was acknowledgement of our persistence, our strategy, and our refusal to accept the limitations imposed upon us. The administrator's apologies were carefully worded, some more sincere than others. I accepted them politely, understanding that the true impact wasn't in words, but in the change of circumstances. Our fight had not only restored Jamal's opportunity, but had exposed a pattern of oversight and bias that others in the academy could no longer ignore. It was a quiet but powerful lesson. Injustice can be challenged, and those who underestimate others often underestimate the consequences of their own arrogance. The reversal was complete, not through anger or chaos, but through strategy, persistence, and unwavering advocacy. Jamal's first day in the program was a revelation. His talent, once questioned, now received the attention it deserved. Mentors engaged with him, peers acknowledged his skill, and I observed a subtle transformation, not just in the academy's recognition, but in his confidence. The victory was multi-layered. The immediate recognition of his abilities, the personal validation of our struggle, and the public acknowledgement that persistence could challenge systemic bias. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of closure mingled with empowerment. As we left the academy that afternoon, the weight of the journey settled into a quiet satisfaction. The plan we had executed with meticulous care, the alliances we had forged, and the evidence we had amassed had culminated in a moment that transcended personal triumph. The humiliation of those who had underestimated us had been replaced with acknowledgement, and in that reversal, the true power of persistence, love, and strategic action was revealed. Our sweet revenge was complete, not cruel, but morally just, and it reverberated far beyond the walls of the academy into the community that had rallied alongside us. After the academy's concession, life didn't suddenly become effortless, but a sense of healing began to settle over us. Jamal walked into his new classes with an air of quiet pride, his confidence no longer tentative but solidified by the validation he had earned. Teachers approached him with respect, acknowledging both his talent and the extraordinary journey that had led him. There, I observed this transformation with a mixture of relief and admiration. The boy who had once questioned his worth now moved through the hallways like a young man who understood that his abilities, persistence, and character had carved a place for him in a world that often overlooked children like him. The community's recognition mirrored our own sense of accomplishment. Parents who had once whispered doubts now praised our persistence. Mentors who had supported us celebrated Jamal's achievements. Local media outlets continued to follow our story, framing it not just as the triumph of one child and father, but as a lesson in resilience, accountability, and the power of community. I realized then that our struggle had rippled far beyond our immediate circle, inspiring others to confront bias, advocate for their children, and demand fairness in their own lives. The journey, once solitary, had become communal, a testament to the power of solidarity in challenging entrenched systems. Jamal, in quiet moments at home, reflected on his experiences with newfound maturity. We discussed not only music, but also the lessons learned from our fight, the importance of preparation, the strength of persistence, and the necessity of documenting injustice. I wanted him to internalize the principle that talent alone is insufficient if it is not, accompanied by advocacy, strategy, and resilience. In his eyes, I saw comprehension, a readiness to navigate future challenges with courage and intelligence. Our struggle had transformed him, equipping him not only with recognition, but with the skills to confront life's inequities with poise and purpose. As for me, I found a sense of fulfillment that went beyond the victory itself. Watching Jamal thrive, witnessing the community rally, and seeing the academy confront its biases all reinforced the truth that persistence, love, and strategic action can dismantle even seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The journey had been arduous, fraught with doubt, backlash, and exhaustion, yet the outcome validated every sleepless night, every meticulous note, every careful strategy. Our story was a reminder that justice is not always immediate, but when pursued with determination and clarity, it is achievable. In those moments, I allowed myself to imagine the future, not as a distant dream, but as a tangible horizon. Jamal's recognition opened doors not just to musical programs, but to confidence, opportunity, and the belief that he could navigate a world that sometimes resists change. And as I watched him practice late into the evening, fingers gliding across the piano keys, I felt the quiet satisfaction of a mission accomplished. We had fought, we had persisted, and we had prevailed, not through anger alone, but through careful planning, unwavering love, and the refusal to accept injustice as inevitable. Looking back on everything, the rejection letters, the sleepless nights, the relentless documentation, the strategic meetings with Ms. Patel, and the community rallying behind us, I realized how far we had come. What began as a personal fight to secure Jamal's opportunity had evolved into a profound lesson in resilience, justice, and the transformative power of persistence. I often think about the moments that could have broken us. The dismissive glances, the whispered comments, the subtle racial biases embedded in polite bureaucracy. Each of those moments, painful as they were, became fuel for our strategy, sharpened our resolve, and ultimately led us to triumph. Jamal's growth throughout this journey has been extraordinary. From a boy hesitant to challenge authority, he has become a young man capable of navigating complex situations with poise and confidence. He has learned that talent alone is not enough to overcome systemic barriers, that advocacy, meticulous preparation, and the courage to stand firm are equally essential. Watching him receive the recognition he deserves from teachers, mentors, critics, and our community fills me with a deep sense of pride. It isn't just about a place in a music program. It's about validation, empowerment, and the understanding that his worth cannot be measured by someone else's narrow lens. This story has also reinforced for me the power of community. Alone, our struggle might have remained a private injustice, perhaps even a defeat. But with the support of neighbors, mentors, advocates, and allies, we turned what could have been a quiet disappointment into a public lesson in accountability. There is strength in unity, and justice often requires voices beyond our own to echo the truth. It reminds me that when people come together to challenge inequity, change is not only possible, it becomes inevitable. As we look to the future, I carry with me the lessons of this journey. How can we continue to fight bias and create opportunities for those overlooked? How can communities mobilize to support their children against systemic obstacles? And how do we ensure that recognition, once earned, is sustained and expanded? For Jamal, and for all children of color facing similar challenges, the answers lie in vigilance, advocacy, and unwavering belief in one's potential. Our victory is not the end. It is a foundation, a testament to what can be achieved when love, strategy, and resilience converge. And as I watched Jamal practice late into the evening, the music flowing effortlessly from his fingers. I am reminded that sometimes the sweetest victories are those that demand patience, persistence, and the courage to never give up. How far would you go to protect and champion the dreams of someone you love? What does it mean to face repeated rejection and still refuse to give up? And if one voice can spark change, how many more can rise when others are inspired to act? These are not just questions, they are the heartbeat of this story, the pulse that drove every late night, every meticulously organized binder, and every conversation that demanded recognition for Jamal's talent. Through this journey, I want you to understand one thing: persistence matters, not in isolation, but combined with preparation, strategy, and an unwavering belief in justice. Jamal's talent alone would not have been enough to pierce the veil of systemic bias. It took evidence, community support, advocacy, and the courage to challenge authority thoughtfully yet firmly. Each step forward, documenting the unfairness, gathering allies, showcasing his ability, built momentum that could not be ignored. The story also reminds us of the power of love and responsibility. As a father, I learned that protecting your child is more than shielding them from disappointment. It is guiding them through the battles they are forced to face, showing them that setbacks are not the end, but an invitation to fight smarter and harder. And Jamal, in his resilience and focus, taught me that belief in oneself, coupled with guidance and support, can turn even the harshest rejection into opportunity. So listen closely. Your determination, your careful planning, and your willingness to stand up against injustice, big or small, matter. They matter for you, for those you love, and for a community hungry for fairness. And remember, every challenge, every biased glance, every closed door is not a stopping point. It is a call to action. Persist, organize, and rise, and you will see doors open, opportunities recognized, and justice served in ways more profound than you ever imagined.